Story 1. The Scratches on the Floor. The house was one of those old New England salt boxes, all slanted floors and drafty windows. My sister Lily and I shared a bedroom that had a deep, dark closet and a floor that creaked like a coffin lid. My mother, a single parent working long hours, insisted the noises were just the house settling. The first sign was the whispers. They would come after midnight, faint, like a transistor radio tuned between stations, always originating from the depths of the closet. I'd pull the blanket over my head, but the sound seemed to press against the fabric, dry and hissing. Lily, who was only 6, began complaining about the shadow. Man, she was too young to know how to invent a horror story. She'd simply point to the corner of our room and say, "He watches." My mom would sigh, tuck her in tighter, and tell her to stop making things up. The night I heard the dragging sound was the worst. It was a slow, deliberate scrape, like metal being pulled across the old wood floor. It started near the toy chest, a heavy, resonant sound in the absolute silence, and moved inch by agonizing inch toward my side of the bed. I held my breath, eyes squeezed shut, absolutely certain that if I so much as peeked, I would see something leering back at me. It stopped right beside my head. The next morning I was desperate for proof, and there it was. 3 long parallel gouges were scored into the floorboards next to my bed. Fresh, deep claw marks that looked like they'd been carved with a hunting knife. I dragged my mother to the room. I pointed, my hand shaking. She didn't look scared. She looked furious. "You did this with a toy or by dragging the dresser," she yelled, making me feel like a liar and a vandal. "I swear I didn't," I whispered. But she was already on her knees trying to buff out the deep marks with her hand. After that, the presence grew aggressive. My door, which I always shut tight, would be wide open when I woke up, and the closet door was perpetually ajar. Then came the night I saw the figure in the hall. The hallway light was on, but as I watched, the light flickered and died. A shadow, impossibly tall and gaunt, detached itself from the blackness. It didn't walk. It seemed to flow up to the doorway. Its head, a featureless black oval, dipped into the room, scanning. I squeezed my eyes shut, silently praying. When I opened them, the door was closed. The hall light was back on, and I was alone. Years later, after we had moved out and the memories had faded into nightmares, I finally asked my mother about the house again. She confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I saw something too. Sometimes I'd wake up and see a man's shadow standing in my doorway. I told myself it was the streetlights, but I knew it wasn't. I just couldn't risk scaring you. The scratches stayed in the wood, and the memory stays in my mind." Story 2, The Caller at the Curb. Growing up, I had one reliable stop on my daily bike route. The house at the corner of Juniper and Elm. It was a big, quiet place with a sprawling lawn and a long gravel driveway. Most afternoons, an older man stood at the end of that driveway. He wore the same tan work jacket and a fedora, and he'd always be watching the street. He was never shy about calling out. "Hey, red bike," he'd shout. "How was school today?" He knew my name. He knew I had a little sister, and he even complimented the shiny new bell on my bike before I'd ever mentioned it to anyone. I'd stop at the curb and we'd talk for a minute. He'd tell me a little joke or a tiny story about a bird on his fence. He was friendly, but he always kept to the same rule. He never stepped off his driveway, and I never crossed the street. One day he was gone. Days turned into a week. The curtains in his house were drawn and the place felt suddenly cold. Curious, I finally parked my bike down the street and worked up the nerve to knock on the side gate. A woman answered. She had kind eyes but a look of permanent weariness. I asked her about the man with the hat. I described him, his smile, and his consistent spot by the curb. She froze, then said, "You must mean my husband, Harold." "But honey, Harold passed away last spring." My stomach lurched. I asked for a picture. She brought out a framed photo of a man in the same hat with the same smile. But as I leaned in, I noticed a detail the man on the driveway never had. A thin, pale scar running from his ear down to his mouth. "He had that since he was a boy," the woman explained. "He hated it." The man who spoke to me, the man who knew my name, had had a smooth, unblemished face. I raced home, the image of that scar competing with the memory of the smooth, smiling face. I tried to forget him, avoiding that street for months. Then came the storm. I woke up suddenly, pulled from a deep sleep by the sound of my name. It wasn't my mother's voice. It was deep, slightly gravelly, and it was coming from right outside my window. My name? Are you going to race me now? I screamed for my parents. My father checked the yard with a flashlight, and my mother insisted it was the wind whistling through the screen. But I knew that voice. I knew the way it inflected my name. For years I told myself I'd imagined the whole thing. But the memory of that day, the friendly smile, the missing scar, and the widow's eyes remains too solid to be dismissed. I drive by that house occasionally now. The driveway is always empty. But every time I slow down just for a moment to check the curb, I half expect to see a man in a hat waiting, ready to call out, "Nice car. Did you get a new one?"